I'm going to answer that question. I'm going to answer that question for you very quickly, and then we're going to get on to where we left off. The answer is to that, to the Bikur Cholim, is that the Gemara says when you go to visit somebody, why are you going? You're going to see them personally so you can help them. Why help them? Are you a doctor? You can't help them. Because if you are there, you'll see their distress and you'll be able to calm them down. They will become more calm when they see you. And then the Gemara gives an example and says you should actually clean their room. You should mop their floor. Well, mopping their floor, when is the last time you went to the hospital and mopped the floor? You probably never. But actually what you're saying is clean up for the person, whatever that means, cleaning up. I can't clean up for the person on Zoom. But the rabbis said, our rabbis of today said, it's better than nothing. Rav Moshe Feinstein said that it's better to visit by a telephone, because in those days we didn't have, in Moshe Feinstein's time, Zoom, and we didn't have FaceTime, but we did have telephones. He said, phone the person if they're in Paris, France, and you're in Toronto. Phone them and call them and see how they are. It's better than nothing. Today we have Zoom, so a Bikur Cholim visit on Zoom would be accepted if you can't get there in person. But going back to the Leil Seder, to the Halacha, there was a letter written by the Sephardic rabbis, all of them, and they gave a tshuva. Was it the year before last or last year? I can't remember. It might have been for last year. And they gave permission for 3 central problems for using Zoom on the one of the Sadarim, they said. Imagine the chief rabbi in Israel saying, and I have the tshuva, I can share it with you, I can send it to you if you want to actually see it. I actually have a copy of it. And the tshuva said that because they were afraid that people will come to use it, even on Yom Tov, they'll say when things are more lenient, they're going to use it all the time. Once we open up the floodgates and we say you can use it this year for a Seder, next year when the pandemic's over, you're going to say I can use it again because why not? Why shouldn't I use it again? I used it last year, I can use it again this year. The answer is no. They said only for this year. They gave a paskening and they said that they were afraid that many of the younger generation will not have a connection to the grandparents. That was what they said. The younger generation will not have a connection to the grandparents, and therefore they signed the document for Seder Night 2020. I have it here now. And they said that they will allow the Zoom to be used for the one Seder that is not on Shabbat. The same way that they would allow a sick person to take a medication that is would normally not be permitted on Pesach because it would be considered chametz, but you can take obviously medication. So they use that leniency, and we'll talk about Havdalah and Megillat Esther and Zoom and Pesach and all of those things as we approach Pesach. First of all, I want to begin by thanking Adele and Marvin Randall for sponsoring today's session. I think that's a beautiful thing that you did, and they did it for a beautiful occasion. They did it for Marvin's birthday, which is coming up, I think, on Friday. Am I right? Friday? So happy birthday. I'll sing for you on Friday. And Mazel Tov, I won't give your age, but I can tell you, I said to someone today, I said, I took you for 10 years younger for sure. I figured you were at least 10 years younger. And you also said a compliment to me. You said, thank you for all that I do for Beth David. I don't know what it is that I do, but whatever I do, I thank you also as very much for your generosity. Thank you. And
Marshall, my good friend, I will be 81.
81. Well, you don't look even close, I can tell you right now. So I should be like you at 81. So what did we learn last year? What am I talking last year? You can't remember last week. Last week, we were talking about the strict opinion, the strictest of opinions when it comes to electricity and the use of electricity on Shabbat. And we learned that the Chazon Ish, who is the Chazon Ish? We talked about the Chazon Ish. And we spoke about how not only the Chazon Ish is a great scholar, Avraham Yeshayahu Karlitz, But in fact, there's a whole branding of etrogim for Sukkot that is actually named after the Chazon Ish. And the Chazon Ish said that flipping on an electrical switch is considered boneh. It's considered building. He said it's building because you're constructing. You're bringing two wires together. I don't know if you know that. You know, if you take two wires, a live wire, a positive and a negative, you know, you go inside I don't recommend you doing this unless you studied electricity. I took a year of electricity one year back in 1979. I did a lot of interesting things. If you open up your light switch and you remove the switch, make sure that you pull the fuse before you remove the switch because you can get electrocuted. I didn't tell you to do this. And you take off the two wires and you join the two wires together, the light comes on. Right? When you flip the switch is joining the wires together. It's joining the circuit. And he said that when you flip an electrical switch, that's building because it's constructing just by bringing the two wires together. And he said the same as permanently cementing two blocks. Remember we said you're not allowed to take one block, put it together and glue it or cement it or nail it or screw it. It's tikkun mana. Remember we said tikkun mana, which means repairing, fixing. Tikkun means fixing. We know tikkun olam, fixing the world, repairing the world, which right now doesn't seem possible, but putting things together. We talked about how you can destroy something, but you have to destroy it so it can't be used. You can't just take a piece of paper and neatly take the paper and cut it down the middle because you've created two beautiful pieces of paper that are both usable. But if you just destroy the paper, you can use it. So that would be called tikkun mana. And we learned that, if you put one block and you cement it to another block, what's stopping you then from taking another block and putting it and cementing it to that block? And if you keep building and putting blocks on top of blocks on top of blocks, what's that called? It's Donald Trump referred to it as building the wall, remember? So it's called building a wall. You can't build a wall on Shabbos. That was the strict opinion. And then the Chazon Ish is really, he's focused on this one single case in the Gemara where he said, remember we talked about the whitewash painter who takes the handle for the paintbrush and he's going to plaster the walls with the white schmutza stuff that he puts on the wall to make the wall ready to paint, and he's whitewashing the wall. He needs to get high up, he needs to get low down, he puts a pole, he attaches another pole, he attaches another pole, but some people said that's not permanent, because if you take the pole and you add a segment, you can now take a segment off. So putting a segment on it, that became an opinion that isn't necessarily followed, although we know that whitewashing and painting on Shabbat is not allowed because that's doing something permanent, right? But the attaching of the handle, putting the handle together, according to the Chazon Ish, was asur. It was forbidden on Shabbos because it was considered to be the final step in making what? In making a usable, therefore in concept, you're making a usable item, flicking off the switch, and flicking off the switch is the same thing. So Esther asked a question, and she asked about talking about the idea of an umbrella on Shabbos. So an umbrella on Shabbos is not allowed. Why? Well, some people would say that maybe if the umbrella was already put together, was already assembled and put up, some people would have the leniency of using it. But you're not allowed to open up an umbrella because that's constructing. It's called boneh, it's called building. So opening an umbrella is not.
But it's not permanent, it's for temporary purpose.
Yeah, but it's creating a permanent structure because it will not come down until you take it down. And lest you come to take it down on Shabbos. So it's like the cooking thing. You can't start cooking for Saturday night after Shabbos on Shabbos. So you can't put an umbrella up. If you put it together before Shabbat, some people might have a leniency, but even that is walking under the canopy, as you're not supposed to do that. It's considered building. That's a whole separate issue, and we'll talk about that. But I want to stay with electricity, not umbrellas yet. But we'll get there. I mean, it's a good point. It's a very good point. So we know the strict opinion about electricity. We talked all about it. Let's look at something a little more lenient. Is there such a thing as lenient about using electricity on Shabbos? Well, I guess it depends on how it is that you're using it. The Minchat Shlomo, remember I told you everybody's referred to by their book. Nobody's called, I love it when the rabbis get up at a funeral and they say, Kohelet wrote. They say, Kohelet says. Well, we know that Kohelet, what is Kohelet? Kohelet is Ecclesiastes. Kohelet is the actual book. So the authors of the books are referred to by their book. So whenever you hear the word, you'll hear this in text, and then it'll ring a bell later. You'll say all of a sudden, oh, I remember hearing that from Marshall. Whenever you hear the Minchat Shlomo says, we're referring to a wonderful, wonderful scholar of our generation. He died in 1995 at the age of 84 in Eretz Yisrael, and it's Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. I think most people have heard of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. He's a renowned Orthodox posek, so he decided Jewish law. He was the Rosh Yeshiva at the Kol Torah Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, and he lived in the neighborhood of Ramat Shlomo, which is where my teacher right now lives. So my teacher, Rav David Fink, who I study with online, lives in Ramat Shlomo, and he lived right around the corner, so he was actually quite friendly with Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And he always refers to it as, whenever anybody asks Rav Fink, asks a question like, well, koshering a microwave on Pesach, is that even allowed? I mean, the conservative Jews do it. And he says, well, if your rabbi in your community does it, you can follow that by putting a glass of water and boiling it and heating it up. And the steam, there's a Hebrew word for steam. Rochama knows the word zeya. Zeya means the steam that rises up into the cavity of the microwave. And zeya, which goes up from whatever you're cooking into the cavity of the microwave, can never be cleaned. You'll never take your microwave apart and go up there and clean it. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rav Moshe Feinstein, who originally said it was okay and then did a 180 and reversed it and said no, and the Orthodox opinion really follows that the modern Orthodox still kosher microwaves. In Israel, some do, many do not. Why? Because there's always different opinions. How do you get up inside to clean it if the steam is rising and the steam is going up inside? So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach takes a text from his first volume. He wrote many volumes of Tshuvot, Shelot u'Tshuvot, in the Minchat Shlomo. And he published this particular volume himself. Why am I saying he published it himself? Because he wrote many volumes, and posthumously, after he passed away, his family released many of his Tshuvot, which should be released. We should read them and we should learn from them. But when a family releases things that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach didn't release himself, we have to think, is that something that he would have wanted us to have read? So Rav Fink, my teacher, always says, in my holy neighborhood, meaning Ramat Shlomo, he says, by the way, the Ramat Shlomo is named after Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. In my holy neighborhood, we don't do that. We don't kosher a microwave. They use that expression, you'll hear that, which means their community doesn't do something. It doesn't mean we can't do it. I always, nowadays, find it very interesting because, Rav Moshe Feinstein was always more lenient when it came to tzorech, when it came to great need. He would find leniencies. When a microwave cost, I remember we couldn't afford one. Microwaves, the first time we got one, I think, was in the 1980s. But they came out in the late 70s, and they were like $1,500. Well, $1,500 back then was probably like today spending, $3,500, $4,000 on a microwave. And people wanted to use it on Pesach. They were excited, They want to make matzah and cheese on matzah and different things. So what do? They put it in. They kosher the microwave and they use it. But today, I go to Walmart and you can see a microwave for $79. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody can afford $79. If that's hard for someone, then you have to think about that. But for those that can, you could think about getting another microwave for Pesach. But why would you want to have 3 or 4 or 5 microwaves? Maybe, you have to have a milchik microwave and a fleishik microwave. Now you're all laughing. I'm not joking. The Frum people do not use a microwave for milchik and fleishik. They use it for one. Your daughter does, Ruth, but she does not. Of course not.
Oh, I think the microwave is, maybe it's,
Right.
I don't know, it's one or the other, and then she has a toaster over for the other, no.
So that's what they do.
And they don't use their microwave at Pesach, no.
Right. Of course not. So the issue is that going back to that, microwave is something that when you cook milchiks in it, I don't care if you cover it or you don't cover it, the steam rises up. You've completely made that microwave milchiks. I know everybody covers their food and everybody's careful and everybody washes it and everybody uses it for dairy and meat. Truth is, in the Frum community, they use the toaster oven for milchiks because they want to put bagel on a cheese or whatever it is, and that's it. And some people only use the toaster oven. They have big toaster ovens today, by the way, beautiful big ones for $99. And you have a toaster oven, and they won't even use their oven for milchiks. They only use the oven for fleishiks. But you can use your oven for meat and dairy because it's a large cavity. That was last session. We're not going to talk about that today. So whenever a Rav starts off in his opinion, and I've said this, starts off by saying, in my humble opinion, I always laugh because they weren't so humble. You know what I mean? These were great Talmidei Chachamim, and they say, my humble opinion. We, as lay people that read that, we think right away, oh, what a tzaddik. He's saying, in my humble opinion. And you have to take it with a grain of salt. You have to understand. They're saying it to say to you, if you don't believe what I'm telling you, you're an idiot. Because if I say it, it's got to be true. If Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is saying it, and he says, in my humble opinion, he's saying, if you don't listen to my humble opinion, I don't know what. So here's what he says. Switching on, by the way, he's responding. This is what I love about this tshuva. He's responding to the Chazon Ish in this response. So this is the full-time job of rabbis, to argue, right? In my humble opinion, switching on the electrical apparatus is not a violation of the Shabbos prohibition of boneh. Oh. A better comparison would be not boneh, or screwing a long extension together of 2 sticks to build a longer stick. A better comparison would be an example of joining the wick to the oil of an oil lamp. Now think about up north in the country where I have this shack up north. The people gave me one of those kerosene lamps. Apparently they're very dangerous. You have to be careful. If they fall over, you can burn the cabin down, which might not be a bad thing for my cabin. But those things have a long wick, and the wick goes up, and the oil's in the bottom, and it takes the oil and it goes up to the wick. And he said, when you join the wick to the oil inside the oil lamp is a reservoir. It has a tank below, and if you stick in a wick into the tank, and if you did that, according to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that would be a closer comparison to switching on the electrical apparatus. So he's comparing flipping the switch to the wall to the wick that goes down into the oil, which is absorbing the oil all the time until the oil runs out. So if you've got a gallon of oil, that could take you for, I don't know, a week, right? Or longer. How long would it last? Let's think of, he says, a stream of water. Here's an example. What if you used a stream of water to turn the mill? You got a mill, and the mill is grinding flour in the old days. And you've got water, and the force of the water is being used together, or even how about wind? Today we have windmills, right? They generate electricity by wind. So we're not turning anything on. You got a windmill. The windmill is generating a flow of power to power the windmill. Another example would be compressed air. Air that's in a tank and it's compressed, and all you do is open up a valve. Opening up a valve of air would be similar to opening up the window if your apartment is hot and you want to cool down your apartment. It's cooler outside. I'm going to open up my window and let the cool air in. Is that allowed on Shabbos? Of course it is. You can open the window, right? So now you are simply asking for the air power. You're opening up an air valve and there's air, and the compressed air is coming in, and it's going to power the windmill, which is going to grind the flour on Shabbos. He says, how would that be different? If you were using the power to grind flour in a mill, he said that would be different because grinding is the violation of, that's the malacha. Grinding is the violation of Shabbos. The wind is just being used to turn the fan. Therefore, creating a breeze, it's just making a breeze, air coming. That seems okay. The airflow is okay. The grinding is the malacha. That's the problem with Shabbos. But simply moving air is not a prohibition. You can open a window and you can move air. And furthermore, he says, switching on a light switch on a wall, flipping that switch, even if the wires are already attached to the ground from the house, because we talked about bona if it's attached to the ground, he said it's called using the apparatus. It's only using the apparatus. He says you're not making an apparatus. You're not going in and putting together screws and attaching the switch to the apparatus. You're just using what's already there. Now understand, they didn't necessarily know so much about electricity. We talked about that. There's a difference between DC current, a direct current of electricity, and AC current, which is what we use in our homes today, which is an alternating current that is always there, we think, flowing back and forth. So in other words, the electricity is already in the wall. I'm not going down to the hydro station and running and having and turning on the main station to the hydro. The wires are all over the street. They're coming in, they're into the house, they're already flowing, the electricity's there. I've got timers going on for my lights, the timers go on, the timers go off, the electricity's flowing all through the house. If the lights are going on and off automatically with the timer, then I'm only using it. You remember we talked about the radio? He said, using an apparatus is not the same as making an apparatus. The Chazon Ish said that if you switch the electricity onto the radio, he said you are making a functioning radio and you are performing the act of building. It's called boneh. But Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who argues with everyone, thank goodness, he says no. He says simply switching on a radio, he felt, for example, is just called using the radio. The electricity's in the wire. The radio is already plugged in to the wall. I'm not plugging it in. It's plugged in before Shabbos. I'm flipping on a switch to use the apparatus. That's all I would be doing, he said. So he says switching on the radio is only using the radio, not making a radio. You're not going to make a box and get tubes and fasten the tubes and solder the tubes to the wires and have the wires soldered to the whatever it is that you're doing to make there's a rheostat. You have to have a rheostat you have to build the radio. Somebody has to build it. They built the radio, RCA built the radio 150 years ago, and I'm taking the radio that's already built and I'm simply turning on a functioning radio. He said that is the same. It's not construction. It's the same that using river water, the water that's flowing by itself. on the river. It's already flowing. There's no finality to it. The electricity is always flowing unless the main station goes off. He said the river is always flowing. Even the Jordan River in Israel, even the Yarden, it might be low. Maybe there isn't so much water that year, but there's always a flow. The water is going. It's moving before Shabbos, during Shabbos, after Shabbos, on Tuesday, it's moving. So the question, let's ask this question. You open up a refrigerator door. When you open the refrigerator door, it switches on a light, right? We all know this shtick. We all know it from the early days when we could actually control it and you could go in and you could just unscrew the bulb. Today it's not so simple. If you don't have a Shabbat mode on your fridge, you have to go in and take a panel out and go inside. And by the way, if you've got a newer electronic fridge and you don't think it has a Shabbat mode, Google it and look it up. You'll be surprised at how many of them do. They built this thing which keeps the compressor running on a lower speed, so the light goes off, and it's like you hold these two buttons down together for 10 seconds, and you dance on your head and hold your right up arm in the air and shake your left leg, and I don't know what happens, but you do all these things magic, and then all of a sudden the fridge goes into this mode. But you've got to understand the technology of how to get it back to the regular mode, or else you'll be stuck in Shabbos mode for the rest of your life. So anyway, you open up that fridge, it turns on the light on Shabbos. In the old days, it was easy. You taped the switch, you unscrewed the bulb. If you grew up like I did in my house, my father didn't even worry about it. It was not even an issue. I know when I went to other people's homes, when I went to Rochama's home, the light bulb was turned off on Shabbos. I can tell you for a fact. In my home, the light bulb wasn't turned off necessarily in my parents' house because my father just figured it was like b'di'evet. You know, I opened the fridge because I want to get food. I didn't open the fridge to care about the light. In fact, I don't even care about the light. If you're not concerned about the light and you're not lechatchila from the beginning thinking, I'm going to open the fridge because I want to turn the light on, that's already asur, because that's completely, you're doing something intentionally. And Judaism reflects differently on intentional acts and unintentional acts. You know, if you hurt someone's feeling unintentionally, you phone them up and you say, I'm sorry, I never wanted to hurt your feelings. I'm the first person, I do that because I have a big mouth and I sometimes say things I shouldn't say, so I have to watch what I say. But I always am aware, because my parents were good people. They brought me up to know, don't be afraid to say you're sorry. But when you do things intentionally to hurt people, or you do things intentionally to violate Shabbat, that's a problem. That's the problem. So one of the things that happens when you open up a fridge, what happens? The cold air comes out of the fridge. Everybody always thinks the compressor is in the fridge is making cold. It makes the fridge cold. Well, it does make the fridge cold, but it does it through the reduction of heat. It does it through the removal of heat. The compressor has fans to it, it has condenser coils, and it has an evaporator coil. And those condenser coils and evaporator coil, how does Marshall know this stuff about the coils in the fridge? Does anybody know how I know this?
You took an electrical course on fridges.
Did you take a fridge apart?
No, but my uncle did. My uncle Harry, my grandmother, my bubby bought a fridge, one of the first refrigerators in the 1940s, the late 40s. An electric fridge was a big deal. And back then they were 40 cycle. They weren't even 60 cycle. And Toronto was a 40 cycle community. And when they switched them, so my uncle wanted to know how the fridge worked, so he took apart the whole fridge into pieces. And my grandmother, my bubby, called up Eaton's department store and said, I don't know what happened. The fridge fell apart. So they sent the man to look at it. It was in pieces. They did them a toiva. I'm telling you, I don't ask how my bubby convinced them, but they gave them a new fridge. Anyway, many years later, you know, today, if a clock breaks, they throw the clock out. Nobody fixes a clock. In those days, when we went from 40 cycle to 60 cycle, they fixed everything. Toronto Hydro came around to the homes and they changed the compressor in every refrigerator. Every refrigerator in Toronto got a new compressor, a 60 cycle compressor. I'm giving you a history lesson. And what happened was the compressors that were put in, they also asked you, how many clocks do you have on your wall? And you'd say, I have 3 clocks. And they came with little transformers to put into your motors to upstep it to 60 cycles so the clock wouldn't move too fast, as the, because otherwise, so they would regulate the clocks by either changing the motors and the clocks or putting in a regulator. This all went on back then. Today they would say, here's $50, go buy 3 clocks. So it's a different world because we're a throwaway society. In 1980, I thought I'd be interested in this. I took a course at George Brown College in appliance repair. It was a whole 1 year, like a 10-month course. How to fix stoves and fridges and dishwashers and microwave. And I learned all about how to remove a compressor from a fridge and replace it. I learned how to take a dishwasher pump out. Today they just buy a new dishwasher. I learned about this and I hated it. It was an awful job. And I said, I don't want to do this. So I started to sell them. And I was selling appliances. And from selling appliances, I was studying later with Cantor Benny Meisner and with Chazan Danto. Ruchama happens to be here. I would learn voice with Grisha, and I would learn Chazanut Nusach with Benny Meisner. And 1 year, Chazan Danto was not well, and I was upstairs in the auxiliary service, so I got called down, and I davened Yom Kippur in the main sanctuary with a choir. Don't ask. I only knew the songs and the pieces because I happened to have sung in the choir for 5 or 6 or 7 years with Louis before, so I was able to do that. But I was actually an appliance person at that time, if you can believe it. Look where I am today. Today I'm sitting here with you. We're learning halacha together. Who would ever think? You would never, I don't know. It's the world, you never know what's going to happen. So one of the things that happens is you open up a fridge and all of the temperature goes down. The thermostat warms up and it says, oh, because there's air entering the chamber meaning the fridge, then therefore it switches on the compressor. It activates the compressor and the compressor comes on. And when it gets cold enough, the compressor switches off in order to maintain the temperature. So it goes on and goes off. So indirectly, some people say, oi, I gotta open up the fridge only when the compressor is running. Because if I open it up when it's not running, then I'm causing the compressor to cycle on, and they're worried about that on Shabbos. Some people don't care about it. They say, I'm opening it up to get the cold cuts. I'm not opening it to cycle the fridge on. See the different opinions? Lenient and strict. But somebody asked Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, you're gonna, why is Marshall talking about fridges? Who cares? Because somebody asked Rav Shlomo Zalman, they said, what if I open up the door on Shabbos? Isn't that causing the compressor to indirectly switch on? I'm making it go. Well, if we considered it directly switching the motor on, the Chazon Ish would have said it's absolutely a Torah violation. It's what we would call midoraisa. But he said maybe it should be considered indirectly switching the motor, which is at most a rabbinic, a derabanan. A violation of Shabbos, a derabanan, is not as severe. It means in the old days, you wouldn't get lashes for it, right? You wouldn't get makot. Well, it's a big difference between a rabbinic violation and a Torah violation. And since there is no prohibition to switch the compressor on and off, because the compressor doesn't do anything, which is considered one of the 39 malachas. There's 39 violations, grinding and sewing and building. It's not one of the 39 malachas. You're not doing any cooking. You're not doing any grinding like in the case of the flour mill. You're not doing any sorting. Some from people, they remember, like if they don't have a light on their dryer because they want to be able to open up their dryer, they left it closed on Friday. Shabbos morning they wake up and they got, I got no socks in my drawer. I got to go to shul. What am I going to do? They're all in the dryer. You reach into the dryer. First of all, you got to hope your light doesn't go on because now you open up the dryer door. Now you go in and you grab all the clothes and you start to put the 2 pairs of socks together. The black ones together over here, the black ones with the stripes over here. You can't do that on Shabbat. That's called sorting. It's like a farm violation. So one frum person I met says, what do? He said, you take them all out like a handful of clothes. You throw them in the air, and if you throw them in the air and they happen to fall, and you see a black one over here and a black one over there, you can take the 2 black socks out of it and you can wear them. Such mishigas. But this is the way that the world is, right? So we look at what, is there a prohibition? He said that it's not one of the malachas, the refrigerator business. It's not cooking, it's not sorting, it's not grinding, you're not doing bishul, Therefore, it's not an issue, it's not a problem. Therefore, he said there's no prohibition to open the refrigerator door that causes the compressor to come on a little bit later. This is the opinion of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. When I give the opinion of Rav Shlomo Zalman, he's not a lightweight. It's not like I'm quoting somebody who is, the rabbi next door. Everybody today has smicha, This is one of our poskim, one of the greatest of our generation. And if he says it, then you could pretty much follow that as an opinion. But this begins Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's attack. You see, the Chazon Ish said, no way, you can't do that. And now Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is arguing. He's saying, I'm attacking the opinion of the Chazon Ish. Chutzpah, absolute chutzpah, that he's going to go up against the Chazon Ish, showing that the position of the Chazon Ish is weak. It's not a strong enough opinion. And a better example, he said, of the water power, the water flowing, or the wind power would help lead to a lenient or a leaner position. For sure making it not a Torah violation and only a midarabanan, only a rabbinic violation. So now, when you go to a rabbi and you say, in my humble opinion, Chazon Ish, I think you're wrong. The Chazon Ish has to respond. And he responds and he says, when you switch on an electrical apparatus, you are bringing the two wires together, which joins the two wires together, and it eventually leads to the main power plant. There's a main power plant somewhere. I don't know if it's in Scarborough or Mississauga or downtown or Newmarket, but somewhere there's a power plant that is bringing the power into your home, which is grounded to the ground and part of the build for what you live in. And when you put those two wires together, you are joining them together, leading all the way through the wires to that main power plant. And then the Chazon Ish says, just bringing life into the wires. You know the expression live wires. Just bringing life into those wires is switching an apparatus from dead to alive. Well, that's true. Think of a radio, and everything's there, and it's all put together, and it has tubes, and it has all these things in it. If I put the switch on, you're essentially joining the two wires together. If you take the knob off the radio, inside that switch there's two wires, and if you take it off because the knob broke and you want the radio to work, you got to join the wires together. By flipping on the switch, you're joining the wires together. So he's saying, now you've taken a piece of junk, a box. It's just a box with tubes and wires. And he said, and you're joining them together, you're making that apparatus come alive. So he said that in itself is a violation of boneh. And surely, he says, if you switch, for example, the radio on while the current is flowing, because we're talking about AC current, there's already electricity in the wires, he says. The current is flowing like the water, then you're for sure guilty of boneh, of building. So according to the Chazon Ish, the concept is no different than bringing together the segments of the stick for the whitewash stick. The guy that was putting one stick, he wanted to reach the top of the roof, so he keeps joining sticks, makes it longer, and then he wants to get to the bottom and whitewash, so he pulls a segment, takes a segment off. He said that is no different at all. That's the same thing. But what if you have a Shabbos timer? Rav Shlomo Zalman says, according to the Chazon Ish's words, when you switch off on the apparatus, you turn it on, that's the moment that the prohibition applies. You turned it on, that's a violation. Okay. Only if the current is flowing at the moment you switch it on and the apparatus goes from dead to alive is it considered construction. According to the Chazon Ish's own words, the prohibition occurs in that case. But on the other hand, if you switch on the apparatus when there is no current flowing, for example, a timer is engaged. You can't put the timer on Shabbos, right? You know, you can't set anything in motion on Shabbat. That's the problem with dishwashers. Ruchama missed this last week, but you know, the problem in Israel with the dishwasher, everybody uses timers. They put the timer on before Shabbat, they put the dishes into the dishwasher, and then they close the door after they put the dishes in, and when they close the door, the dishwasher comes on by itself later on and washes the dishes. What's the problem with it? The problem is as soon as you close the door, there's a magnetic switch. You are then setting the timer in motion, and it's already Shabbat. Once you set the timer in motion before Shabbat, that's fine. So in Israel, people are disengaging that door switch, and they're taking it off so that the water would run regardless. Whether you close the door or you don't close the door. So you got to make sure that, at least on Shabbos, make sure you close the door so you don't have water all over your kitchen. It's an important thing to think about. And I know that most people don't care. They might say, you know what, I'm going to be careful that I'm going to use the timer for my dishwasher on Shabbos, but they're going to say, but I'm going to violate it by just closing the door, right? Put the timer on, close the door, forget about it, and just say, I'm not going to worry about it. Well, that's questionable. So, according to the Chazon Ish, there's nothing permanent being done like attaching two bricks together in this case. So what is the whole big deal? What is the whole problem? There has to be a methodology. There has to be something by Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that we can take that we'll be able to consider. So he tries to find a comparison to something that everyone does on Shabbat and everyone does on Yom Tov. And that is to find a comparison to the act, therefore leading to a leniency for the use of electricity on Shabbat. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is looking and he's reading and he's searching and he's trying to find a way. There's got to be a leniency here. And he was asked if aligning the numbers would be the same as a violation of writing on Shabbos. So if you're writing on Shabbos and it's a permanent thing and you're writing, is it the same as just taking numbers and aligning them up together? And his answer he says, here in Israel, everyone has a water meter which has discs that turn around. You know, on the outside wall of the building that you live in, there's a water meter. And the water meter has a disc. And the disc is turning. When you use the water in the house, the disc is turning. And while that disc is turning, it's giving a meter. So when the man comes around, he can read the meter once every 3 months. He can see how much water you're using. And then he can charge you accordingly for the water. Water's more expensive in Israel and things are different. In Israel, everybody has a dud shemesh on top of the roof, which gives you a hot water, and the dud shemesh gives the water, comes down, it's solar heated, it's law. In Eretz Yisrael, you cannot have a building or a house or anything without a dud shemesh, because water is different, and water is more precious, and it should be here too, and water is also heated there differently, so there's a whole another machloket about can you use the water from a dud shemesh on Shabbos, and pretty much most of the poskim say yes, unless you have an electric heater, like if it's a cloudy day and it's cold, and you flip that switch on before Shabbos, now you got a problem because you're using water that's being heated by an electrical element on Shabbat. So you're supposed to make sure that the electric switch is off on Shabbat before Shabbat, so you're only getting water that's heated by the sun from the dud shemesh. But in Israel, when they have those water meters that are constantly turning with those discs, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, everyone is using one of those on Shabbos. Everybody in Israel has to use one on Shabbos. There's no other way. And nobody ever objected to using that. In concept, he says the combination is similar and therefore it's got to be okay. This is an example of how he tries to find something to do that we do that is similar in the real world. You know, back in the times of the Gemara, they didn't have water meters. Today we have water meters, and every time you take water, the disc is turning. She said everybody in Israel is using water. And whether it's cold water or hot water, and every time you use cold water, the water's flowing, you're causing the disc to turn. The disc does not turn if you don't use water. So he says, this is an example of how we look at what he calls the primus, or the kerosene burner that we talked about at the beginning, that kerosene lamp that has the reservoir of the oil in it. And he says, cooking is permitted on Yom Tov. And people used to cook with a primus stove on Yom Tov. You know, not everybody had a fancy stove. Back then you had like a burner, and you'd have a burner on top of it. You could put a pot on top of the burner and it would cook. And he said people use those on Yom Tov, and everybody knows that we fire up a primus on Yom Tov. You know, you can transfer fire, you can take the fire from a different source. Today what do? We keep a yard site candle lit in the house. You can light a gas stove from it. There's all kinds of different things you can do on Yom Tov, right? So you fire it up. And he says, first you have to pour alcohol on top, and you have to light it in order to heat the top. And only then you force the kerosene through the pump to make it work. And he says the top has to be hot up there at the top before you start pumping. You have to pump the kerosene, and no one seems to be concerned about the violation of heating up the top. And he says if nobody ever prohibited that or called that tikkun mana, what is tikkun mana? Remember I talked about it? The final blow of the hammer, the final blow that makes two things beat together, that is considered bona, building, that makes it function. He said it's a complete functioning apparatus, and this is how you have to use it. It's how you use it. You open up the water tap, the same thing as the kerosene. You can't use the kerosene stove without heating up the top and without pumping the kerosene. You have to do that in order to use it. And if you don't do that, you can't use it. He said, similarly, it's the same as a radio. Wow. Wowee. He said, the way to use it is to introduce electricity. You turn the knob on, the electricity comes into the radio. How can that be considered tikkun mana? The electricity is already flowing. The final step, which makes it work, the final step in making a radio was completed a long time ago in China in the factory when they built the radio. When they made the radio and they put it together, they put the tubes and they put the wires and they put all the chazarai in the radio to make it a functioning radio, that was done in the factory. The same as the primus, the plunger, the pump, the kerosene lamp. It was already made and it's already considered a functioning apparatus. And that's how you use it. And there's no objection to that. If somebody would say that you can't use it on Yom Tov, even if you thought that the kerosene pumping was considered the tikkun mana in the final step, he says, I'll tell you right now it's temporary, but it would only work as long as there's kerosene in the tank. Once the tank is empty of kerosene, the stove would go out. It'll run out of kerosene, and it'll go out all by itself. You know, if there's no kerosene to fuel the lamp goes out itself. The same thing as a candle on Shabbos. You light the Shabbos candles. You don't blow them out because you're going to your neighbor. You put them, you leave them. Or you know you're going out, you put them in the sink because you want on a fire in the house, and you light them there so you don't move them, muktzah, but you leave them there because we want to be cautious to say that, that you don't blow out a candle on Shabbos. You let the wax burn down and it goes out and extinguishes itself all by itself. It'll run out of kerosene, it'll go out all by itself. And similarly, he says, as long as there's fuel in the generating station in Mississauga, in Newmarket, in Pickering, wherever the power station is, as long as they've got electricity to power my apparatus, the radio continues to work. Well, he's creating a position for leniency, you see. And we know we have the leniency already for timers. We know that we use timers for lights on Shabbat. We know that our Rabbanim said that's okay because a timer brings you happiness. It brings joy for your Shabbat. If you had to sit in the dark, what kind of joyful, you can't read, you can't even study Gemara, you can't do anything. How would that be a nice, joyful Shabbat to sit in the dark? So they allow us to put a timer in motion before Shabbat to turn a light on and off. Why don't they allow us to put a timer on a radio? Turn the radio on at 1 o'clock and listen to the baseball game or Saturday at the opera and have it go off at 3 p.m. The timer turned it on. The timer turned the light on. The timer turned the radio on. We know the answer. It's because our community doesn't yet accept it. If I walk into Jerry and Georgie Bagelman's home on Shabbat and their dishwasher went on, I know that they set the timer on before Shabbat. They didn't do it now. I'm assuming because I already know the timer went on, and everybody does that, puts their timer on in the dishwasher. But a radio, I walk in and I hear your radio playing, and now you're embarrassed and you're saying, oh, the community doesn't listen to radio on Shabbos. If you walk into my house, if Rabbi Shaim walks into my house on Shabbat and he hears the radio going, the community hasn't yet accepted it. I'm pretty sure it's coming. I'm pretty sure most people, and I can tell you from my experience in my holy neighborhood around here, that most people have what I call the Shabbos television. The Shabbos television is left on to news or whatever they love to watch in the basement or in the other room quietly, Stillahite. They're not turning it on, they're not turning it off. It's left on all Shabbos. They leave it on and they use it. And I can tell you, many of the Ashkenazim look for the leniencies of the Sephardim and go along with them, even though maybe we're not supposed to. Why? Because it's convenient, it's good. In my holy neighborhood, I said to someone last year, they asked me a very embarrassing question. They said to me, he's a very frum guy, by the way, this guy that asked me the question. And I know the family quite well. And they're lovely people. And he said to me, did you do Zooming on the Seder? Well, when you ask somebody that question, you put them into a difficult position because you don't know how to answer it. And you say, well, I wouldn't exactly call it I zoomed on Yontif. I put the Zoom on before Yontif. We all know it's nonsense, right? And I didn't exactly Zoom. I wanted to see the grandchildren. My wife made me put it on. Blame somebody else, It's somebody that my daughter said, if you don't do it and you don't put it on, I'm going to be in great trouble. And you better see the grand. And you try and look for all these leniencies. And in the middle of the conversation, he turns to me and he says to me, it's okay, we did it too. I was shocked because he's Ashkenazi and I heard this opinion and he followed the Sephardic opinion to do it. And I said, what led you to follow that tshuva, to follow that opinion? And he said to me, my wife. In other words, shalom bayit. The wife said, you're going to use it or I'm going to give you a mak on your cup. So in other words, sometimes for shalom bayit, you can do things that are not a Torah violation, that are a rabbinic violation, because shalom bayit is also important. I want to give you one more comparison. We have just a few minutes left. I got to run unfortunately, to a funeral, and that's why we made it a little bit earlier today. But let me give you a different comparison. Think of a garden hose. You're outside and you water the plants, let's say, or whatever it is. A garden hose is delivering water, right? Think about it. What is it doing? It's delivering water. Do you ever look at your hydro bill? In the hydro bill, it says, this much electricity was delivered to you. Delivered. I'm thinking of the truck that pulled up and gave me the electricity. They always say, this is what we delivered to you. Well, it's true. The conveniences that we have today, you can't even believe it. You flip on a switch, boom, you got lights, you got Zoom, you got this, you got that. It's crazy. So think of the garden hose. It's the deliverer of the water. Through what? Through pipes. How about the pipes of natural gas? Natural gas for the furnace, let's say. You're being delivered the gas. The gas company always says it's delivered. We delivered this much gas to you. Think of the wire being similar to the garden hose or to the pipes which bring in the gas. The only thing which makes water come out of a hose or a gas out of the pipe is more water being pushed out of the hose, right? The water that's coming out of the hose is being pushed by the water behind it from the hose, and the water is being pushed by the water behind it. It's called pressure. The water is continuously applying pressure, which is pushing the water through the pipes. And the same thing happens with the gas. As the gas is coming out of the pipe, more gas as pressure is pushing it out. Have you ever had a gas leak on a barbecue hose? I have, from the outside. You have to call them. you have to turn off the gas right away because it's dangerous. And it sounds like this. Because the gas is leaking out. You can smell it. They put a smell into it because they don't want danger. They want you to know that it's happening. But it's all happening through pressure. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, the copper wires which bring the electricity are in concept exactly the same. The electrical wires are the same as the gas being pushed out and the water being pushed out, and it doesn't have electric current flowing through it at all because he says there's no pressure. Everything is balanced. Electricity is balanced. Only when the power plant down wherever it is in Mississauga turns it off, when the power plant turns off their turbines, only then does the electricity begin to flow. There's a magnetic wave that moves through the wires that is no different than water moving through the hose or through the gas or through the pipe. So now what do we have? We've got a big problem. We have a big machloket. See, I thought I could do all of this in 4 weeks. I think it could be 20 weeks. There's a big machloket between the Chazon Ish and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And we don't have time today to finish with that machloket, but we will next time. We have to solve the problem. We have a strict opinion by the Chazon Ish. We have a more lenient position by the Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. We're going to find the balance. We're going to find what we call paskind. What is approved? What do we apply? What is, as the rabbis call it, the bottom line? So there's two things here. John Gooderman says, just before we go, he says, today with most electrical devices, though they're always on, you enable or disable proximity or saying, hey Google, or walk in front of your sensor, or you let the camera see you. Your body neurons of electrical and walking on a rug will create a charge. So then what? So the answer to that is, it depends on if it's b'di'evet or lechatchila. So, in Eretz Yisrael, you're walking around the kotel, there's cameras on that are photographing you all the time. If you stand in front of the camera and you go and make a face, that's asur. You can't do that. That's posing for a camera. Every Shabbat, when I go like this to you on Shabbat at the live stream, I have to tell you it's asur. I'm not supposed to do it. I'm actually posing for you in the live stream. I'm supposed to pretend the camera isn't there. I'm supposed to look out as if there's a congregation in daven, and I'm not supposed to focus on the camera at all. I don't want to do that because I want people to feel that they're part of a community. Hopefully we'll be back in shul and you won't need me to do that. But really, waving to the camera is not allowed. So that's the problem, John, is that you can't do something that is intentionally disrupting Shabbat. If I walk by a motion detector and the light goes on, I didn't care if the motion detector was there. I didn't want it to go on. In fact, I'd rather it wasn't even there. That's allowed. And then there's another one from John. He says, is raising or lowering the volume on your TV or radio that's always on okay on Shabbat? The answer is no. It is not. There is a tshuva that says that you may lower or raise the rheostat of the electricity on the light that's already on. If you've got a light switch that has a dimmer, on Yontif you can raise the dimmer or lower the dimmer because it's like reducing the flame on the heat on the stove on Yontif. You can do that, but you're not allowed to turn it completely off, and you're not allowed to turn it on from the beginning. You can leave it on, and some people have the leniency on Yontif of even turning it on, but that's a separate discussion. But if it's on, you may adjust up and down. And that's it. So that's it for today. Let's come with the bottom line next week. The bottom line for that, and after we have the bottom line on that, Judy brought up a very interesting thing called hearing aids. We need to talk about that. But I want to talk a little bit about something else, which is more modern, something that affects us today, and it's going to really be affecting us today. When I say, what am I doing if I go, hey Siri, put on the lights? I did it in my Siri.
Looks like you haven't set up any HomeKit accessories. You can connect smart devices, like lights, locks, and thermostats, in the Home app.
I'm not that far advanced. I haven't done that yet, put my lights on Siri. But what about voice-activated devices on Shabbat and Yontif? Is that allowed? We have to talk about that as well. And then we're going to go, we need to talk a little bit about Pesach and the whole issue with that, but I think we'll go right to voice activated devices, and then we'll see from there what to do. I'm always going to ask you if you want to keep going or not, if you're interested. If you're not, I'll stop it and I'll talk about something else. I have lots to talk about. Like I say, I have a big mouth, but if you want to continue through this journey of technology, I can tell you I've got a lot of different things about the whole issue with video cameras, microwaves, the use of microwaves on Yom Tov. There's a lot of fascinating opinions that go all the way back to the very old sources. Anyway, I wish you a good day. I thank Marvin and Adele Randall again for sponsoring today, and I also wish you a happy birthday for Friday, and I wish everyone in advance, because it's already Yom Revi'i, a Shabbat Shalom. And I see Alex is here, Refuah Shalema for Avi, that he should have good health. And let's join together again tonight at 5:30 p.m., everyone.
Sharp.
Sharp.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you, Marshall.
And thank you
Great
for
as
the good
Marshall.
wishes.
always.
Thank you.
Marshall,
Bye,
thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Be well.
Bye.
Marshall, have a good day. Thank you. Appreciate the answers.